In today's episode of the Daily Brief, I'll talk about two interesting stories. I first talk about the depository wars, and finally, I talk about market coupling entering electricity trading. Welcome back to the Daily Brief show by Zerodha, where our aim is to simplify the biggest news in the financial markets in a way that's one level deeper as compared to news channels. I'm your host Akshara, and today is Tuesday, 29th July. Coming to the first story. If you're watching this, chances are you've at least dabbled in the stock market. And that means you've benefited from India's capital market institutions, even if you didn't realize it. Every time you effortlessly buy or sell shares with just a few taps on your phone, you're experiencing the quiet magic. Ask someone who invested before this digital era about chasing paper certificates, verifying ownership, or anxiously waiting days for trades to settle, and you'll quickly grasp just how good you have it today. A big part of this convenience is thanks to India's depositories. Think of a depository as a digital bank vault, but for your securities. Instead of you having to hold paper certificates, which are prone to getting lost or damaged, a depository safely stores your investments on your behalf. In effect, then, you own shares in digital form with a depository, much like you own money in digital form with a bank. Your demat account, in fact, isn't actually held with a broker, it's held with a depository. Brokers like us are just intermediaries that give instructions to the depository on your behalf. The real convenience of this system comes through when you trade, and this system allows you to fire and forget an order. You don't, for instance, have to courier your share certificates after you sell them. And this is possible because of depositories. They are the ones that move securities from one investor to another in the background without friction. Nobody has to touch the security or check after it. It all just works. Now, the older of India's two depositories, NSDL, will soon list its own shares on the market. Their offer document gives us a window into a business without which we wouldn't exist. So let's dive in. A bet on a depository, broadly, is a bet on India's capital markets as a whole. If the last few years are anything to go by, that's a solid bet to make. In FY 2020, 4.96 million new investors opened demat accounts, and by FY 2025, that number had ballooned to over 41.06 million, nearly 8 times as much. And with that, the markets have practically doubled in size. Back in FY 2019, companies had raised a total of rupees 919.5 billion from India's capital markets. And in FY 2025, that number had grown by rupees 2,181.2 billion. This was, of course, a remarkable period. We might never repeat this rate of growth again. But at least directionally, India's capital markets are slated to only get more active over time. And if more Indians invest than ever before, their business necessarily goes to a depository. As exciting as India's capital markets are, however, the depository business is a stable, sedate one. Now, India's market for depositories is a duopoly. On one hand, there's CDSL, a company backed by BSE. On the other hand, there's NSDL, backed by NSE. So, all depository business in India, and by extension, all of India's capital markets, is handled by one of those two entities. And it's unlikely that any other entity will shake up this market anytime soon. This is also a business that's heavily constrained by regulation. So, everything from the role the depository plays to the prices it charges to the procedures it follows are governed by SEBI. So, changing things is difficult. Accordingly, this isn't a business where you should expect much excitement. Depositories earn most of their money from three things: A, charging for transactions, B, charging fixed amounts for taking custody of a security, and C, annual charges. This model is by and large set in stone. And if you want to evaluate one of the two depositories, you need to understand how it fares on these fronts when compared to its rival. To be fair, depositories also provide some other value added services. For instance, NSDL runs tools that let companies host their AGMs online and accept e votes on company resolutions. One of its subsidiaries is also running a payments bank. These are, however, relatively small sources of revenue, and chances are it'll stay the same way. If you're assessing such a company, you're only looking within a small range of possibilities. The fact that the depository market is relatively quiet doesn't mean there's nothing setting India's two depositories apart. The two have, in fact, seen widely different trajectories over the years. When India's capital markets saw their recent once-in-a-lifetime liftoff, something we've written a detailed blog post on, in case you really want to picture what happened, a lot of that recent rush of new investors was, in fact, channeled towards CDSL and not NSDL. Now, this was when many of India's new age discount brokers took to CDSL, and it was these companies that seeded India's capital markets liftoff. As they grew, their legions of retail investors all had their accounts made with CDSL. At Zerodha, we perhaps wrote one chapter of this story. Now, over time, the effects of this shift have become evident. Right now, CDSL has announced 15.86 crore accounts. NSDL, in contrast, has a little over 4 crore. Now, NSDL has by and large gone for the business of non retail clients. Think of big banks, foreign investors, legacy full service brokers, and the like. If you take retail customers away from the picture, in fact, NSDL utterly dwarfs CDSL in the number of accounts it has. Since the biggest players of the market all keep their business with NSDL, naturally NSDL holds a lot more securities by value even if CDSL has more accounts. Nearly 87% of all of India's dematerialized securities by value sit with NSDL. The average NSDL investor holds almost rupees 1.2 crore worth of securities in their account, and the average CSDL investor, rupees 4.6 lakh. The big question though is, how much does that matter? One way to look at this question is to ask, is there a way in which a depository earns money for the number of shares it holds? Well, sort of. Depositories charge companies annual custodial fees for all their securities that they keep with them. But there's a catch. They don't charge them according to the number of securities they hold. They charge by the number of folios. That is, they charge by the number of accounts holding a security and not by how much each account holds. So if one depository stores 10,000 shares of a company held across 10 demat accounts, while the other has just 500 shares of the same company but held across 50 different demat accounts, it's the latter that the company will pay more. Here, CDSL has a clear advantage. With nearly 4 times the number of accounts, CDSL just has more folios on its books. Now, a depository doesn't just earn money for holding a share. Much more of its revenue comes from activity, from when securities are traded and transferred between different people. So, every time the depository is asked to process a trade, whether that trade is for one security or for 1,000, it charges a fixed fee. Those fees make up the biggest chunk of a depository's revenue. Now, NSDL's clients are much bigger than those with CDSL. They trade more securities by value. But once again, that isn't the deciding factor. The real question is, who processes more orders? Here again, CDSL wins out. We don't have a clean data source for the number of transactions either processes, but if you look at the number of shares as a quick and dirty stand-in, CDSL processes far more orders for shares than NSDL. When companies dematerialize their securities for the first time, they pay a depository a small sum. And then they pay one of the two depositories an annual fee for monitoring who invests in the company. This, for both depositories, could be a massive business opportunity. See, all listed companies already have their shares dematerialized. But increasingly, most unlisted companies are getting their shares dematerialized as well. The government has asked all companies above a certain size to only issue shares in dematerialized form. That means each of India's 18 plus lakh active companies, once they turn a certain size, will have to head to one of the two depositories for the service. For context, there are currently just over 1.15 lakh companies, listed and unlisted, that actually have dematerialized shares. So far, this is one place where NSDL has a clear lead. It has more than twice the companies that CDSL does. Equity shares, of course, aren't the only security there is. From debt instruments to warrants to mutual fund units to an assortment of other securities, each has to be registered with a depository, and a depository earns money each time that happens. Take the corporate bond market. Unlike equity shares, which for any company usually come in just one variety, each bond issuance by a company could be unique with entirely different terms. Each one then must be registered separately, which earns the depository a fee. Here as well, NSDL has a lead. Nearly 2/3 of India's active dematerialized debt instruments sit with NSDL. So all of this brings us to the bottom line. Who earns more money, NSDL or CDSL? NSDL has more companies. It registers more securities and it houses the accounts of bigger investors. CDSL has more accounts, many of which are from retail investors. So what's the better business? So right now, CDSL beats NSDL handsomely. And this is a new phenomenon. As recently as FY 2021, NSDL was earning much more than CDSL. But in the retail investing boom of the last few years, CDSL took a handsome lead. coasting on the back of millions of new retail accounts and billions of transactions. Today, CDSL beats NSDL out both in revenue and profits. Not only is CDSL making higher profits, in fact, it's also more profitable with consistently higher margins. But there's a caveat here. A significant portion of a depository's earnings depends on how much market activity there is. So when the market runs hot, the sheer volume of transactions can turn a depository into a huge cash machine. Now, the last few years saw the mother of all bull runs. Retail investors were more active than they've ever been, and that's why the business of both depositories has been growing at such a wild pace. So, what happens if things turn out for the worse? We're not sure. NSDL claims that they have one key advantage here. While CDSL has earned higher revenues in the recent past, NSDL has larger, more established customers. It also has a larger share of recurring revenues like annual fees from companies. If India ever enters a terrible bear market, one where retail investors exit the market in droves, NSDL believes it will find it easier to survive the purge. Its customers will continue to invest more than those of CDSL. So, is that true? We hope we never find out. For all that catastrophizing, however, it's important to remember one thing. The business of a depository is a remarkably stable one. NSDL isn't really like a regular for profit business. It's an institution which is run as a private company. It's baked into the very heart of India's capital markets, creating some of the core plumbing it needs to run. And for that reason, NSDL will always have a role to play. If India's capital markets are alive, at least in the near future, NSDL will be alive as well. Functionally, there are just two things that could really threaten a business like this. A, that there is, at some point, a structural change that transforms how the markets work and unseats NSDL from its position. Or B, that NSDL goes through some sort of catastrophic failure. Say its IT systems fall apart, which makes major players in the market lose trust in the company. Both are remote tail risks. It's much more likely, at least to us, that NSDL shall stay locked in a slow, grinding battle for relevance with CDSL. Both will try eking out minor competitive advantages that give them a lead for a while. For now, it seems to us that CDSL has the upper hand. But who knows how that picture changes tomorrow? Now, coming to the second story. So, India is about to witness a significant transformation in how electricity is bought and sold. On July 23, 2025, the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, or CERC, announced that beginning in January 2026, electricity trading would soon see market coupling. This is a move that promises to bring alive the promise of electricity trading. And it could create a single electricity price across exchanges, make better use of power lines, and ensure both buyers and sellers get the best possible prices. But what does market coupling even mean? What will it do? And who shall it affect? Let's jump into all of that. Most of India's electricity is covered by long-term contracts called Power Purchase Agreements or PPAs. Someone that generates electricity enters a 10 to 25-year long deal with a state-owned distribution company or someone else that consumes or sells that electricity, setting out everything from how much electricity they shall supply, how much they shall charge, and so on. Now, these details are rigid and inflexible, but they give a sense of certainty to everyone involved. Lately, however, there's also a short-term market. This operates more like a regular market where prices are based on supply and demand. About 15% of all electricity consumed in India goes through this short-term market, with the spot market accounting for 8% of total consumption. This spot market currently represents about 143 billion units of electricity, something worth thousands of crores in trading value. And this spot market is what we and the CERC is looking at. So, what does a market for electricity even look like? Well, a lot of it takes the form of electricity exchanges. Here, a business can sell surplus electricity to anyone who needs it. Distribution companies, large industrial consumers, or other power generators that are struggling to meet their long term commitments. Without these exchanges, buyers and sellers of electricity would have to hunt urgently for counterparties, and neither would have a reference point for a good price to trade on. Currently, there are largely three such power exchanges in India. The first one is the Indian Energy Exchange or IEX, which dominates the landscape with a near monopolistic 85% market share. It's also the only publicly listed power exchange. The second is Power Exchange India Limited or PXIL, which is a joint venture between NSE and NCDEX, the NSE backed commodities exchange that runs 8% of the market. The third is Hindustan Power Exchange or HPX, which is the newest player with around 7% market share. Now, these exchanges all have several markets that run concurrently. The day ahead market, which is DAM, runs like a forward market where electricity is traded for delivery the next day. The real time market or RTM is more urgent, facilitating electricity trading for delivery within the next 30 minutes, helping entities tide over unexpected shortages or surpluses. And then we have the term ahead market or TAM, which allows trading for longer periods from one day to several months ahead. Although any two units of electricity behave alike, there are differences in what it costs people to make it. There are also differences in how much people need it and what they're willing to pay. So, how do you find the correct price? Well, here's what happens. Everyone that wants to buy or sell electricity puts up a bid with whatever price they have in mind. The exchange then starts matching supply and demand. It starts with the cheapest available electricity first, moving up the price ladder until anyone who wants electricity finds a supplier. The price at which this balance happens is called the market clearing price or MCP. This is essentially the most expensive unit of electricity needed to fulfill all demand. So the MCP becomes the price of electricity. Every seller is paid the same price and every buyer pays it, regardless of the individual prices they offer. Currently, each power exchange operates independently with their own MCPs, but that's inefficient. Each exchange has its own pool of buyers and sellers, its own auction system, and its own pricing, completely cut off from the others. This essentially dilutes the biggest advantage of using an exchange. Individual exchanges match the supply and demand on their platforms, but these might be completely unconnected to the wider conditions outside. You may, for instance, try buying electricity on an exchange with very few suppliers that day, even while others are full of cheap electricity. And this is what market coupling is trying to solve. So, what exactly is market coupling? Market coupling is like creating pipes across these three separate exchanges so that it behaves like one giant unified marketplace. So, here's how it will work. All buy and sell orders from any exchange get pooled into a central platform operated by a market coupling operator or MCO. Instead of three separate order books, these shall come together to make one national order book capturing the entire country's electrical supply and demand. For each time slot, this shall create a single uniform market clearing price, and this single price shall be reflected across all participating exchanges. In effect, even though there are multiple exchanges with market coupling, they'll have a unified order book. So all buyers and sellers across the exchanges shall be pooled into a single virtual marketplace, and there shall just be a single combined auction between the three. So before considering whether to implement coupling in the system, CERC wanted to ensure it would actually benefit the market. In February 2024, they ordered Grid India, which is India's national grid operator, to conduct a shadow pilot. This was essentially a test run that used real market data without affecting actual trading. The pilot tested three types of coupling across different market segments. The first one was day-ahead market coupling, which stitched together the day-ahead markets. This emerged as the most promising segment during testing. It created notable cost savings and improved economic efficiency. The market saw welfare gains of rupees 38 crores or 0.3%. So welfare gains is essentially the amount that everyone in the system was better off by, while trading volumes were boosted by 52 million units, a 0.2% rise. The second one was real-time market coupling, which stitched together real-time markets. This showed smaller gains, with welfare gains of rupees 72 lakh or 0.01% and volume growth of 1.54 MU or 0.01%. The more modest gains here reflect how much harder it is to find advantages within shorter time frames. Aside from these, they tried RTM SCED coupling, which is real-time market with security-constrained economic dispatch. This combined two important functions, real-time electricity trading and smart grid management. Not only will this plug the exchanges together, it would also ensure that the traded electricity would flow without overwhelming any power lines. This showed the most substantial daily operational benefits. It generated net savings of rupees 1.4 crore per day despite raising the average cost by rupees 1 per megawatt hour. Fundamentally, the hypothesis was proven. Coupling worked, and by bringing together different markets, trades that would never happen otherwise could suddenly go through, leaving everyone happier. So, based on these results, CERC has decided to implement market coupling gradually. Here's phase 1. So, phase 1 is day ahead market coupling, starting from January 2026. This is where the journey shall begin. All three power exchanges will take turns acting as the market coupling operator or MCO in a round-robin system, while Grid India shall be the backup and auditor. Phase 2 is real time market coupling. This will be implemented later, taking in experience from DAM coupling so that we find ways of dealing with technical challenges which come with shorter bidding times. And then is phase 3, RTM SCED coupling. This advanced system is still under review. It still needs some work before we're confident of bringing it into operation. And then there's phase 4, which is term ahead market coupling. This is still an unproven idea, so Grid India must first develop the necessary software and run a 3-month shadow pilot before this can be implemented. Under the current system, IEX controls the largest pool of buyers and sellers, giving it the most liquidity. And with liquidity, it can set competitive prices, attracting even more participants. This is where the action is. But could market coupling wreck this lead? The fundamental advantage of being a market leader, the network effect that keeps bringing everyone to your system, could suddenly dissolve. In a coupled market, players will see no reason to choose one exchange over the other. IEX's massive market share might slowly dissipate to all three exchanges, reducing the number of transactions on IEX and impacting its revenue. Now, that could become a problem. The market seemed to believe so. IEX shares crashed by around 30% on July 24th, the day after CERC announced the market coupling decision. This was its worst intraday single day performance since listing in 2017. Meanwhile, PTC India, the promoter of HPX, saw its share price rally nearly 9% on the same day. But IEX's stock did see some recovery once the company announced its Q1 FY26 results, featuring a 19% revenue growth year on year with a 25% rise in net profit. However, only future results will tell us exactly how IEX will fare once the new coupling system kicks in. The company remains positive though. And here's what the management said in their latest con call. The company's management emphasized that market coupling applies only to the day ahead market or DAM, which is just 35 to 40% of their total volume, while it would still be business as usual elsewhere. Even within DAM, it believes that IEX retains responsibility for everything except price discovery, which would continue to set it apart from its competition. So here's the bottom line. CERC's decision to implement market coupling now isn't coincidental. India is undergoing a massive energy transition, with electricity demand growing rapidly. So, the need for more efficient power markets is becoming critical. Reinforming our power sector as a whole is a tall task, but it's important to weed out any inefficiencies we can. The current fragmented system, where each exchange operates independently with different prices for the same electricity, creates some such inefficiencies. These could become more problematic as the electricity market grows. Market coupling nips this problem in the bud by creating a single national electricity marketplace that matches supply with demand to the greatest possible extent. Now, the immediate benefits might seem modest based on the pilot results, but the long term implications could be substantial. It might just ensure a more reliable and cost effective power supply in the long run for India's growing economy. Now, coming to the tidbits. PMAY 2.0 gets a data upgrade. India's affordable housing push just got smarter. The government will now set up a dedicated research center under PMAY Urban 2.0 with a strong focus on data analytics and global partnerships. The aim is to build smarter policies using real time insights and not just subsidies. This comes as urban housing demand rises and affordable housing lenders like Aavas, Aadhar, PNB Housing, and Bajaj Housing are scaling rapidly. The center will analyze demand patterns, housing gaps, and urban migration trends, drawing from international experiences in France, Singapore, and the Netherlands with guidance from UN Habitat. It's not just a policy tweak, it's a move to align housing interventions with the Viksit Bharat 2047 vision, using data to ensure schemes like PMAY 2.0 are more targeted, scalable, and future ready. For India's housing finance ecosystem, this signals a more analytical, proactive approach to urban housing challenges. Coming to the next tidbit, TCS layoffs signal tough times for Indian IT. TCS will lay off 12,000 employees, about 2% of its global workforce, over the next year, mainly impacting middle and senior managers. The move comes as the IT giant faces weak client spending, AI led disruptions, and internal pushback on its stricter bench policy. This follows a broader slowdown across Indian IT. Infosys and Wipro have issued cautious growth guidance, hiring has slowed, and utilization rates are rising. TCS has delayed onboarding for 600 lateral hires, and wage hikes have been deferred. Globally, over 80,000 tech jobs have been cut in 2025, with Microsoft alone shedding 15,000. While AI promises long term efficiency, for now it's accelerating cost cuts and role redundancy. Indian IT isn't collapsing, but the playbook is changing fast. That's all the news I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next one.
Disclaimer: this content is for informational purposes only. None of the stocks, brands, or products mentioned are recommendations or endorsements.